and Alex too. Oh, and so I'm gonna let y'all take over. But again,
really, if we can have 2 sentences for you, can you just talk a little bit about the motivation for the show? Like what inspired you? You had it in your mind so early on. Just maybe 2 sentences and then we let you go.
Yeah, sorry. It's so I whenever I get to curate, like I always default to, my like feminist interests and women artists, like I'm obsessed with women artists. And just the work, especially that all of these artists are making. I always say curating is really fun. It's sort of like going shopping or something, like, because it's all the art you really like and love and artists you appreciate, and then you get to say like, hey, can I have this work for a while and like put it all in a space and look at it together. I mean, it's a silly way of thinking about things, but it to me it helps me. It just is a really personal experience. And sorry, I'm rambling. My work, my work and my curatorial work is not ever like political necessarily, but I mean, I do think that obviously making a show about women artists at any point, especially now, can be seen as like political. And I think that there are a lot of different approaches and ways to exploring this work and the conversations they have around each other. So if that's something you're personally interested in, and like, I mean, there's definitely, again, like avenues and ways of thinking of that for this work, but also it's just gorgeous, amazing, smart, conceptually rigorous, fun work by like such an amazing group of women artists. So thank you. And I hope y'all enjoy getting to hear more from Tirsa and Beth today, and then Jamie next week.
That's right. Thank you again. That was beautiful. I can't believe, look at her, just gave birth 2 days ago, no sleep, and still sounds perfect.
I would show my video, but I'm in like very dirty clothes. I'm like such a mess. Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for everything.
No, it's been such a pleasure. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce the 2 artists for tonight. And I'm going to start with Tirsa. And so Tirsa received her BA in photography from Bryn Mawr College in 2016. And she's a pretty recent MFA graduate from Northridge, so 2020, which is very exciting for us because a lot of our students go to Northridge. And yeah, interesting too. You went through the whole COVID experience, so hopefully we'll hear some of that. I want to just read a short statement because it's so beautiful, and I think it will tie into everything. And I doubt she'll be reading it herself. So, is that okay, Tirsa, if I read it to the group? So she writes, "Time is a fundamental parameter in her practice and denotes the spontaneity and transience of events. Interactive performance and video works explore the connection between loss and sanctuary. Pain and endurance bridge bodies within physical and psychological boundaries, while the relationship of motion and sound synthesizes empathy, futility, grief, joy, and obsession." And because I'm a little torn, I don't want to, yes, let's start here. And then when Beth is in the room, I will introduce Beth. Tirsa, so glad to have you here. So thrilled and honored, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Alex. That was a lovely introduction. God, I just want to preface this by saying I'm not the kind of person to prepare something to written down. So I'm kind of just doing this off the cuff, and hopefully you'll enjoy this kind of wild ride with me through my process and just sort of how I've gotten to the point I'm at and where I'm at with my work. So let me share my screen. Let's see. Okay, can everybody see my website? Looks good. Okay, hopefully. So I'll first start just to kind of contextualize a bit. So you heard my statement through Alex, and basically, I also just wanted to start too with how it ties into the show that Candace really just very thoughtfully curated, because mess is kind of the perfect word to describe a lot of my work and sort of what comes out of the performance, and yeah, and just sort of like what sometimes it looks like, and then it's not always super neat and tied together with a string on top. So so a lot of my work is performance based, and it's one of the things, the components that's become really evident in the last few years, especially when I was in grad school, was the idea of collaboration. And then that can happen in a lot of forms. And even more recently, especially since COVID, I've been reflecting more on collaborating, not just with people, but sort of collaborating with materials, and the landscape and what that looks like. So I'll start with this since it's up here. The sound, we tested it with Alex. She wasn't able to hear it. If some people are, great. If not, it's not the most, it's a component, but it's more visual. So I don't know if people can hear this. There's a little bit of an ambient sound. And it's basically, so this was my thesis project. And the reason I want to show this and talk about this is because it was really this synthesization of performance, but with other people and other bodies, and sort of what that looked like with my sort of DNA, so to speak, in it, but with me this time behind the lens. So for me, a lot of my performance work is very kind of simple in a way in terms of parameters. In the show, I have two pieces. One is called Running, and it was basically a performance of me running as hard and fast as I could until my body just sort of gave out. So it was a very kind of raw, primal, very physical thing. And it was also, there was a lot of futility in it, and sort of self-imposing futility, because I had this band, like a resistance band attached to the wall. And so I put myself inside it and I just ran as hard and fast as I could. The other piece is, to me, it's a little more playful. It's called Rinse and Repeat. And we had this giant vat of petroleum jelly that the department had ordered just for some kind of show for people to do out of the students. And most of it had not been dug into. And so I just decided, I was like, I'm going to just play with all of this and roll around and kind of see what it feels like. And it was a very tactile experience. And so it really kind of depends what material I'm using. So this project is called Collectively Dancing Alone in the Landscape. It's really special because over the course of 2 years, I started it in, I believe it was early September of 2019, which was the beginning of my last year of grad school. And also, as we know, a few months before COVID inevitably hit. And so yeah, over the course of 2 years, I did it with 50 people. And it was really incredible because it was a different kind of endurance. It was sort of the challenges that sometimes each experience would have, or the landscape shifting a little bit, or, the position of the sun, or, and part of this experience, it was almost a little ritualistic. And we would hike up this park 10 to 15 minutes to the top of this view, and we would do it during golden hour. And I would do it one person at a time, and each person would wear wireless earbuds, so the source of the music is invisible. And they had to dance to 2 songs back to back, any 2 songs of their choosing. And it was it really felt special because it was a very sort of intimate and vulnerable experience. But it was just also so much fun. And yeah, and it had all these different tiers to it. And, you know, for some people, it was just, there was such a range of emotion that that came up for people. And for some, like, this wasn't, you know, a big deal at all. And I'm the kind of person, like, I dance everywhere all the time in public. And for other people, doing this in this kind of public space, even though it was a little more private and it, you know, it wasn't like Runyon Canyon in LA, it was still, you know, it was still a very vulnerable, kind of exposing thing for a lot of people. So this was just a really great kind of merging of my idea of performance and dance and movement and bodies and how all these things kind of come together, and setting these very simple parameters, and then letting there be an element of spontaneity with, you know, like, even though the sunset happened every single time, it was always different. It was in a different position. Sometimes there were clouds, there were just all these different factors, and everybody danced and made, you know, marks in the ground in a different way. And just all these little details that over time just became really meaningful. And it was also something that really kind of grounded me during the, not so much, I think I did maybe like a couple of these during the lockdown, but I did do them throughout COVID and carefully. And yeah, it was just something that kind of kept me feeling connected when I was feeling so sort of unmoored and isolated and, you know, and lost. And this was something that I could kind of always go back to and connect with somebody over from a distance. I mean, that's what was really cool too, is that there was enough space that, you know, even when COVID was still at the very peak, it was easy to kind of keep it safe. So this goes on for about 30 minutes. And this is both a sort of a live collaborative performance, and then also functions as a multi-channel video installation. And then just to kind of give you an idea as well, these were some of the stills that taken from some of the performances. And for me, I'd always feel so corny to say, but I never get tired of the sunset. And I think it's an incredible phenomenon. And every single time it happens, it's always a little bit different, even if it's in exactly the same spot, which is what this was. Then let me show you, I'm going to go into my hard drive for a minute to find some, because just in case the sound's not working through my website. But one that was really sort of another piece that I think really jives with the show is, I'm so sorry, just one moment. Okay, sorry, I will just do it through here because I don't want to hold up. So here is Rinse and Repeat. So that was at the show. This is another piece that, this is just one of my favorites because it was a live performance. And I think it also functions very well as a video piece. Just so you know, there is a little bit of glass breaking and eventually just a little bit of blood. But this was something that, again, kind of simple in terms of the parameters and the materials, like very distilled down, but ended up having this kind of amazing complexity to it, which for me, again, is a lot in the details. So this piece is called Slow as Molasses. And so I basically bought out the molasses supply at Vaughn's. And I bought 80 used like flutes and glasses from Goodwill. And I filled them all each with, kind of equally with molasses. And the objective, so to speak, was just to keep breaking them or dropping and throwing them until they were all broken. And this was something that was interesting when I first showed it in some of my critiques in grad school. People had a hard time watching it or didn't fully understand it. And for me, I think something that just comes up in my life and in my work is this idea of endurance and resilience. And I think that's what a lot of what life is. And one thing too, I won't get too deep into, but I have a huge loss in my life that just leaves this huge base of grief, and it never really goes away. And it's something that it comes out, it comes into my work. And I think there's also something to people who, kind of the extreme experiences in life and how we move through that, or how we move forward or process it. So that's kind of going into, another layer. But this piece for me was just very kind of simple. And it was just kind of like, yeah, I'm gonna do this. And I feel like when I do a performance or when I kind of get into that zone, it's just sort of like I've made up my mind, and I'm gonna do it. So it's about 20 minutes. I'll kind of skip ahead, but you can kind of see the aftermath of just like the molasses and the glass and the blood and but I really loved, there was like I don't know, sort of a rhythm to it, and the sounds of the glass and just all these pieces, and it being very sort of methodical and slowed down in a way. Just felt kind of right for it. Okay, let's see. Here's also the running piece. I'm not sure, I don't want to be redundant with the work in the show, but this one I can just show a few seconds in case nobody saw it. But this was also when I had a shaved head, so different time, way before COVID. And I'll also show this. So this is another one kind of similar to rinse and repeat that for me is a little more sort of playful. So again, if the audio doesn't come through, it's basically I rewound, I played the sound in reverse, and so it ends up with this kind of like otherworldly sound. And yeah, this anyway, so I did this was basically came from buying multiple huge bottles of Pepsi at the store, and I basically filled my tub and took a bath in it. So this one's also very long. And it sort of continues like that for another 45 minutes or so. All right, and then I wanted to go into, so this was a recent show, like a little show that I did at this studio slash gallery out in the valley. And I actually wasn't there in person for this. So a friend of mine put this together for me, which was huge. And this I also wanted to show because the flowers were sort of another layer to this idea of collaboration, and then also what they mean in terms of, you know, life and death and symbolism. And what I found really interesting, I was talking to a friend about it, was, and I'll scroll through these as I talk. So the first half of the photos are from the first week of the show, and then the second half of the photos are about 4 weeks later. So, but one of the things that I was talking to this friend of mine who runs the space and basically hosted the show for me, is that flowers are basically like corpses. You know, once you kind of cut them out of their habitat, they're only going to last so long before they start to decay. And so this was basically an installation with the flowers as sort of this organic, you know, natural material. And then there was also this video that was playing on the iPad. And then I also had a projected video on the wall. So this is what they looked like about almost a month later. And I chose lilies, sort of again for what they represented. And then this was sort of a cool connection that I didn't realize until after I'd already chosen them, was that so one of the things that keeps kind of filtering into my work and my process, even if it's, you know, subconscious or not sort of an overt part of the work, is the relationship with my mom, who died about 6 years ago. And, you know, there was a whole lot of trauma and stuff, you know, with that, that is, you know, with me all the time. But with that, there was, she basically, she died from ovarian cancer, but she had cancer a lot at different points. But it was sometime in the last year, and we were living together, and I was basically taking care of her. And I guess somebody had sent or bought us like a vase of lilies. And it was these white calla lilies. And so that's why I ended up, I was like, well, that's even more of sort of a validation that choice. So I think so another thing that I'm just really starting to think about more in my work is, you know, I mean, time is such a broad word, and I think it can be used in so many different ways. And so for me, thinking about time in terms of, you know, how the material or the landscape or, you know, the site changes over time, is really, you know, is really important, and just something that I've really been considering a lot. So this is an example of that. I think this piece, the collectively dancing alone in the landscape, like that, again, was just sort of this critical moment where it was really seeing how this same place had these changes over time that that I just couldn't kind of account for in the beginning. Um, so the landscape and sort of bodies and time and endurance are all things that kind of, I think, are these threads that, even though I don't always know what the performance is going to be or what the, you know, final piece or installation will look like, are these threads that kind of always are running through my practice. I have one more collaborative, basically installation that I'll go through. So this one is called House of Fear. So this was done my last year of grad school, and it was a huge collaboration. It was basically with 3 other art students, 2 in the BFA, 2, including myself, in the MFA. And the reason I want to show it is because it was very sort of conceptual, and it was really incredible because we started with doing these interviews with this 3-person collective that that we were working with, and kind of developing and talking about like what we saw and sort of what our room would look like, and talking about, you know, fear and sort of kind of guiding through that. So it was something that was very collaborative and vulnerable, and it was just, and again, it left room for this kind of like trust and spontaneity in the process. And so it was this installation, but it was also, there were 2 live performances, and so this was sort of the aftermath of that. And it was also very, it was very sort of layered and like video on video, because the whole thing was being recorded, and then people were like in the gallery but in a different room, and like they were being recorded like on this through watching. And it was anyway, it was just this really kind of amazing project that came again from like this really sort of small seed that really just grew and grew from talking, and just also kind of seeing what can happen in that space, and sort of not being afraid to just kind of see what comes out of your body, and, you know, and speaking. So I think that's most of it. Yeah, I will just say, I think, you know, kind of touching on COVID, it feels weird, you know, the place that we're in with it. But it, you know, it feels important to share that I had a lot of momentum in my last semester of grad school with our thesis show. And I'm sure for so many people, you know, in whatever aspect it was a really, you know, difficult time. And I guess this is for myself, but also just to share, with other like-minded people and other artists, that I think, it was so easy for me to compare to my friends or artists that I followed on Instagram who during COVID were still like producing work regularly. And I just felt so kind of disoriented and disconnected, because for me, a lot of where my work stems from is just connections with other people and being out in the world and stimulated. And so it took me a long time to kind of be open to making more work, or sort of just letting myself make something and not feeling like this has to be, like the best thing, or, immediately sort of resolved. And now I'm in a place where sort of everything is like percolating again, and I feel more excited. And anyway, all this to say that I think, that period of reflection and sort of processing, different things, and then the percolation that comes with ideas, or like, oh, maybe I want to try that, or see what happens with this. I think that's really valuable. And sometimes I forget that if I'm not producing work like 24/7. So anyway, just wanted to share that.
So that was beautiful. Thank you.
Good.
Great for all of us to hear. I want to just say for everybody, we want to have a question and answer session at the end. And if you want, so you don't forget your question, you could put it in the chat. But I would like to, just for the sake of time, switch over to Beth. But I definitely, so don't go away, Tirsa. We definitely have questions. Ed, hold your question. We will move on to, unless is it a question to Tirsa?
Yeah.
Okay, hold it. Let's do it at the end, because we have one more artist, and I know, and then the questions can go on a little longer, but I just want to make sure people that have to leave at 7 still get to hear both artists. Beth, so great to have you.
Yes.
I haven't introduced you yet, so I'm going to do a quick one.
Okay.
A very, very short. So, Beth Abaravich, am I saying it right?
Abaravich, yeah.
Abaravich had received her Bachelor's of Fine Art at the School of Art Institute in Chicago. Then she got her Bachelor's of Fine Art and Fashion Design with honors from Otis College of Art and Design. And then finally her master's in at the Art Center. And right now she's teaching, and she's been teaching for a while, so wearing many hats. So besides being this phenomenal artist that you're going to witness in just a second, if you haven't been at the show yet, you teach textiles, science, and fiber arts at Art Center and Otis. So right, one and I think before the other. So right now at Art Center, no?
Right now I'm at Otis. I'm at
Otis. Okay.
And I also teach at Woodbury too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so some of you transfer students might be running into your classes. And you also have been for many years a fashion designer of various like swimwear, knitwear. And all that to say is that your art has just, it fills so many different functions and plates. And there's just a few sentences that I got from your website. So handwork, whether embroidery or printmaking, is layered with multiple processes. Feminism and escapism are subtle in some works and perversely obvious in others. And that's a great note to hand it over to you. So, thank you, Beth.
Oh, you're welcome. I love listening to Tirsa. I'm so happy I got home at a decent time that I could catch a lot of her presentation. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I'll start with my website, like Tirsa. And so what I thought I'd do, if anybody has seen the piece that's already in Mess, I thought I'd start with like the beginning of the node of what has became Cozy, or the big sweater, and then after that. So this was while I was at Art Center, my MFA, and this is the first time when I got there I really started to experiment and kind of go away from the things that I knew. And I ended up, and this is when I came back to the things that I knew. And so what this is, I call it Plenty O Pockets, or pop for short. And it's basically in my brain, what happened was it was a riff on all those really silly commercials that sell things to children. You know, they've got a pillow, but they can put everything in the pillow, and you know, stuff like that. So this has a lot of pockets, clear pockets all over it. And so what I ended up doing was putting all these things that children love, and then by the end, the things that are on the body are the more adult kind of things. And so you can kind of see some of the things, these are the more adult things, but then maybe use a picture towards the end, and then like just really ridiculous stuff. But these are all the things that are in all the pockets. I think, I don't know how many, but there's a lot. And this is at the moment where I started really like kind of thinking of how the number and how much and accumulation. And really, I wanted to have a commercial with this, with like a little girl wearing it, but as she'd walk, she would keep falling because it was so cumbersome. So I think that's really the beginning of when I really started thinking of, wow, the possibilities of what fabric, sewing, textiles, knitting, all these processes that I already know how to do, you know, the possibilities of them, because you can make something very big, but then it folds all up together when you're done, and it can become rather small. And so I have more to say about that, but let's go ahead and I'll go back to my, oh, wait a second, sorry. But okay, well, here, let's do this. Well, please bear with me. I'm in my, yes, I'm in my website, but I am in several different places. So then after I did pop, now I'm in the spinning circle of death. Oh, that's fine. I was working on it too. Sorry, guys. Here we go. So then I did Ziggy Left the Building. This was the year before I made, like the Christmas before I made Cozy. And so I draped on a male dress form this shape, this body, but it was a body that was not ever seen. So it was kind of this abstract form, but taking from fashion, because it was draped on a real form, but it has like 4 arms, 2 legs, and I called it Ziggy. I think David Bowie had just died around that time. And it was kind of spectacular in the way that he could be very spectacular with his clothing. And then I like to utilize paint and installation to kind of enhance the drama. And so this is a purse, like a Ziggy purse. And here's another Ziggy floating in tinted. So really, I'm just exploring all the things sculpturally that fabric can do, that sewing can do, that draping can do. And I mean, like, what does it mean? You know, how can you create a figure? How can you create a body? You know? And I think also it was coming at a time when I was really thinking about like a multiplicity of genders and, you know, who counts and who doesn't count kind of thing. And I think I really started thinking through it through my work. Here's a close up of this, and there's the installation again. I think that's, yeah, that's the end. I'm sorry if it's a little, using my portfolio is a little weird. I had it up and I was using it, so it doesn't help. Here we go. For some reason, okay. And then so I just want to go through, these are a whole bunch of things that I was thinking about and working through, like how can I, you know, like this was a mask I did out of just all this stuff I had around, fringe, pom-pom, sequins. And I did like a little video with this where I sang with this on. And I think it's really fantastic and creating just like another being without it being a being, This is pink, and I use pink in a lot of different ways. I had a recent show at my studio gallery at my studio space, and I used pink. And I think that's another beginning point for me, thinking of bodies and how to change them. I love this because I was also thinking of interior design and what it would be like to kind of like blend with your environment as a human, kind of like camouflage. So I actually started with silk painting, and I made this pattern, and then I had fabric, I exploded it, played with the print, and made the pattern and covered the chair. And then I made more, and I made this kind of garment for this being on the chair that's like this blue resin, so it's kind of blending into its environment, kind of like camouflage. This was an oil painting I did. I just ripped it out of its frame, and I started using textiles and leftover scraps of fabric and trim, and just thought how I could. A lot of other things I'm doing. I'm always 3D, but when I'm thinking of like a flat plane, it's hard for me to be flat. Like I just can't paint. But I'm thinking about how can I use textiles and the techniques that I'm familiar with in a way that you would use paint. Blocks of color, tone, texture. So that's what I was investigating here. So these are all just little practice things. This was a painting I had, and I had another, picture from a magazine that I cut like an intricate design, and I just kind of collaged all these things that I kind of had around my studio. This is Ruffles Have Riches, and it's like just a ton of hand painted silk that I ruffled, and then I made this huge belt to kind of just hold it together, even though it's like it lays flat on the wall, but it has the feeling like it's constraining all this lushness. And I sculpted the buckle, and I cast the buckle in resin. So I love to think of the materials of fashion and the like ideas, things that we normally have in our everyday lives as fashion, but what are they substitutes for? What can they symbolize? How can I use that language to express other things? This was it's just a wall hanging of all these jackets I made. All these, I took this one pattern and I just made it in all these different fabrics. But I love the movement. I love it. It simulates a crowd without it actually being a crowd. It's like they're together, but they're not, because the one pink one is standing out. I think it's painterly too, because it gradiates from one side to the other. I love sleeves for some reason. And so here's the big yellow sleeve. And I actually made a huge shoulder pad for it to go on. And that's what it hangs off the wall. And here's one of the beginning resin pieces. I made the buttons that are on the sleeve. Here's that close up. The buttons. And this is male pattern. So I tailored half of a men's jacket in this curtain fabric from a hotel that I thought was beautiful with wood buttons. And then it has this like kind of abstract knitted loop that it's hanging off of. And so it's kind of thinking like you know, it's like green loop, so it could be grass, but it's loopy. It could be a substitute for hair. You know, the jacket could be substitute for a penis. I mean, like, you know, you can kind of like start thinking about the way we see things and how fashion can kind of serve as an alternative, like these very subversive in that way. This one is called Classy, and I actually really love it, but people, when they see this, they don't understand, you know, if you're not like, they don't get it. But it's like all these polo shirts are draped around, men's polo shirts with the pony and the, you know, polo stick, whatever they call it. And what I did was I used this fast acting resin. I realized it because sometimes it sets in like 30 seconds. So as you're mixing it, one time I was pouring it and it stopped midair. And I was like, oh, what else can I do with this? So I used that here where I would just keep throwing this resin at this till it would start protruding, and it goes in the 360. So there's 4 of these people all the way around with these kind of abstract shapes coming out of their polo shirts. And we're back at this. So let's see. Okay, I'm beginning to understand how to work this. It's just because I was working on it at the time. Okay, here we go. So that really leads me to my thesis show, which was American Thighs. And, you know, so, and this is where Cozy came from. And if you see Cozy, actually Cozy here looks a lot more like, not as lush, not as oozy, but it's funny. I was talking to somebody and it's like, it's stretching like sweaters do. That's what they do. And so here it is in its original setting. And originally my real goal, and these are, I do these sometimes, and I'll show you some of those too. They're like resin charms. And then I kind of put stuff in that when they're all like kind of collage, all these other little resin pieces that kind of multiply their meaning to me. But here's when Cozy was installed the first time. And my real goal was to like take over the male white cube. You know, it's like this authoritarian kind of space. So that's was my goal. That's why I said, I'm just gonna knit a sweater for that. And then when I was looking at it again for this talk, I realized that like really it's like a female alternative to like Richard Serra or Donald Judd or Jeff Koons, right? But it's a softer, it's pliable, it moves, and it like dominates the space. It's looking over everything. It's watching, you know, it's watching you. But in the end, it still gets kind of taken down and it kind of pulls itself together, and then it's very mobile. But the Koons, the Serra, and the Judd, they are immovable, right? They stay there. So that I just kind of realized in retrospect. Here's a close-up of that. So, and then as you go around, I had the arms were really long. And then I did like this kind of groovy take on Luncheon on the Grass from Manet. And I loved it too, because it was more like a mother figure with her children versus a naked woman and the men who are clothed. And I know it's all symbolic and all that stuff, but it still is what it is, right? And so this is it. And there's a little person in this body too. And here's just a little vignette of resin. And here's the necklace I did. And actually, if we look at that, that's like another body on the other side of the room, kind of facing this body. And they're 2 women basically facing each other. It's kind of assumed. And then this is all resin and mold work. And then it's just, it's so funny because I had it all together and I'm like, no, I want two hands with two blue balls on each side. So I like, just like, whip those babies together because I don't know, I just wanted that. And then I used the knit because honestly, I feel like this piece is very personal. And so I used this like knitted mohair to kind of hide the faces because I don't know, it just seemed more interesting too, that a lot of times we aren't seen, when we're feeling this way, or I don't know, it's interesting. And so in here are little found objects, like I think there's a baby and there's a stroller and stuff like that. And so that is that. And maybe if I just go back here, there we go. I'm sorry, I'm not this perfect. Oh, because but it's cool is this will pop in what you guys were watching this whole time is the Whisper to a Scream, which this was kind of my pandemic thing that I did just because it kept my mind off of stuff. But it was a lot of, I love to sculpt, little sculptures and do things like that. And just that kind of handwork and busy work really kind of just kept me, I guess, entertained, or just still thinking about something. There's something about that, the sculpting, act of sculpting. And then I installed it in my studio, painted the walls lavender. And I think there's some close-ups of the pieces. So basically when I do this, I had sculpted all these charms that were of lips and different gestures. And then when I have too much resin, like say I'm casting a hand or something else or the face, every time I have extra resin left over, I always have the whole bunch of these lips molds ready. And I'll just pour in each of the lips. So then I have all these lips and all this stuff. So then I can kind of start collaging with all this extra stuff that I have. And basically I just made molds of like cake pans. So this is a heart, like a cake pan, and this is a round cake pan. So they're like these empty frames that I can play with all these little objects that I've made and found. And these little tiny bunt cakes, I made molds of those. And it's funny, that one to the left, when I was done with that, I use this stuff called monster clay to mold with. And when you mold with it, you can melt it back to its original state. And then you can remold, resculpt. Well, my son looked at that and he goes, oh, what's that? That's cool. That's this one over here to the right. So I'm like, okay, I'll I was just thinking the same thing. I'm going to use that. So I made another sculpture, a different charm with that. And see up here, these are the charms in between. They're spacers, are what I made all the lips with before. So I know I'm talking a lot of process, but a lot of it is thinking through the process, and when you can just let yourself go to a bit to get to that point, then I don't know, something magical happens where the truth comes out. At least for me, that's what happens. I always have lipsticks. I'm very into lipsticks. To me, lipsticks are like a woman's phallus. The female phallus is like a lipstick. And these are all charms I have on the wall. More realistic charms than like the smiling perfect ones. And I always like knits as like a landscape. I always am kind of using something knit as a placeholder for a landscape. So close up. And these I sculpted these. I didn't like mold my lips or something like that. made lipsticks from extra resin. I don't like to waste anything. And then when you have a mold, you don't have to fill the mold up all the way. So sometimes I just use slivers and then I can place them together. Kind of like collaging. And I always like to have make personalized light plate covers if you see them, because I think it's just like owning the space. And the last thing that I did, I actually installed at, I'm sorry, you guys are seeing my whole thing. So the last thing, cut out these, and was I installed in the gallery. I was talking about that before at Keystone Art Space at our gallery. And it was just a really, I had worked on so many things over not just pandemic, but just in general. Like, you know, I just, what's so cool about pandemic for me was I'd find these things I'd been working on for a while. And then I just, because it felt good and some of it was just repetitive motion, I could just, you know, I could just do and then see what happened. So this is called, and now I can't remember. Light at the end of the tunnel. And so it started really as that middle square with this highly embellished silk fabric. And I just kept going. And honestly, you see how it really goes to the side? It really feels like a tunnel. This is a big piece of fabric. It was for a leap and a prayer, you know, just kind of going. And I'd see that, and I finally put it out on my driveway, and I got on a ladder, and I could see it all because it's about 14 by 14, but a little give or take, 14 feet by 14 feet. And then to kind of emulate the idea of a time capsule, like being pulled out of the ground, I knit this grass and this dirt. If you can kind of see down here, there's some dirt. And there it is, kind of close up. And then here is the centerpiece. I don't know if a closer pick, but there's lots of tassels and embroidery and ruffles and all that kind of stuff. And then this is just highlighting a lot of hand work that I was doing because it's very portable. If my son is doing lacrosse or something like that, I always have something I can take with me that I feel like I'm accomplishing something. These are all done shibori, where they're all stitched up really tight, and then I dye them, and I pull them out, and I undo the stitches, and I pull it out, and I got this electric kind of thing happening. And then I embellished it. This is a close-up of the embellishing. I used mirrored vinyl, and you can see the little tassels that I make and little butterflies. I love sequins. I love embellishments. I love stuff. So I just kind of go in there and just keep going crazy. And this one is called The Bridge. And this is all sequined and embellished, and a lot of the design of the shibori I pulled out with hand stitching metallic thread. And this is another one. I call them experimental shibori, where I embellish it. You can see this here, the metallic thread and embellishment. And then I just keep building it up. And this is more shibori, where I kind of pulled out the details. And this is a print. I love prints. I love especially lino cut because they're like sculptural. You know, they're a sculpture that you make a print out of. And then I embroidered around it to kind of pull it out from the print. The background was silk painting that I did. And then I print on top of it. And then I embroidered it. So I have this tendency to just keep going. And sometimes I look at things, it's very hard for me to stop. And so this is Fringe Self-Portrait. And I'm actually going to Arizona to install that this weekend to a textile show. And what's funny about fringes, I think this goes up, is that that's actually a suit I made for myself. And what it is there's just so much fringe. It's like no fabric is seen. When you do that, it's extremely heavy. So I did make some videos with me wearing it, but it's very laborious. So I put it on this beloved mannequin that I have, and I think it worked out really well. It's very fluid. Has matching tennies. And then I brought another sweater. I call it sweater remnant. And if you see here, this is the original use for those lips. If you can see them here, as I was using them as gigantic paillettes or sequins to embellish the sweater with. But they turned out having all these different uses. And I think this is one of the final things. This is American Gothic 2022. So I was really thinking, I was thinking of American Gothic, the actual original, and how it's so outdated, and how can we update that, kind of the way I did Luncheon on the Grass in my thesis show. And this is all hand processes. So if you see the jacket, it's made my own fabric, basically from pieces like the wall piece, Light at the End of the Tunnel. I made this resin button. And then the pink to me was like the femininity coming out of the seams. And you can kind of see here where it's kind of like forcing its way out, similar to the centerpiece of the Light at the End of the Tunnel. And this is the gown for one who identifies as male. And this is the way it closes in the back. And this is the front. It's kind of like got a bust, and then it's got princess seams. And here's a close-up. And this is the detail I put on the front. And that fabric that you see there is all silk painting, lipstick. I call it lipstick camo. So I cut that up and I used it on this. I think this is the last. This is a piece that I had all these, okay, poured that's the purple lips here, and then it's got stuck in the container. And I thought, hey, I can make a sculpture out of that. So I just took all these other lips I had and just oozed the stuff over it. I love that oozy quality. And I actually was happy, and I love it when things just kind of come together when you weren't expecting anything, And here's a side view. I used a shelf bracket to hold it. And this, I have a few prints at the end. This print is called Accessorize. And if you can kind of see, the accessories here are businessmen. And actually, I was really flattered. The fine arts undergrad chair, Laura Cooper at Art Center, bought that. I was really flattered. We haven't really sold very much stuff, so that was very flattering. You see the guys are kind of her necklace. Lipstick Superhighway is a intaglio etching, aqua tint. Lipsticks just really are heavy in my, and then a mouth eating a rose. I think that's my end, although. So, and it's called Stuffed.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
And now I would love to open it up to questions. So
Up share.
if you're shy, put it in the chat or just unmute yourself. I guess we start with Ed. Ed, why don't you go first? Ed, are you still here? Okay, maybe he left. Anybody else have a question? And thank you, Erin, for saying how unique these two artists are. They certainly are. Any questions? Anything? A process? Ideas? No. One more time, I just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Anyway, if you want to raise your hand, if you're more comfortable doing that, or again, writing it into the chat.
My first question is, what is the reason Beth used to make a 3D stuff? You say you use resin to make a 3D like a hands.
Oh,
Is-
yeah.
What kind of resin do you use?
I use, you can, you know what, go to Reynolds Casting. They're in Burbank. They'll help you. If you have something, they'll tell you how to do it.
Okay, Reynolds. How to spell it?
Reynolds, Reynolds. Casting.
So Reynolds casting.
Excellent.
Okay, in Burbank.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'll go over there and ask them what kind of resin to use.
Yeah.
And then the second question is to both of you, both artists. I assume that you received the first draft of my news report about the art show. Is that correct?
Yes.
And based on our last conversation during the opening recession, I have written some statement about your artworks. Is there any comment that you have on my writing? Or do you think that I misinterpret your artwork?
You know what? I think I did respond. I think I sent you something.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, you sent me an email?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll check your email.
Okay, Ed, we'll take this offline.
Basically,
Talk about the work. Ed, we're going to talk about the work at hand right now. We'll
okay.
talk about the article later. But yes, for everybody, please read the last Collegian article, newspaper, because Ed had a whole feature. Yeah, I want to ask, Nicole, please.
My article is not in yet. It's only 2 pictures, but they are going to publish my article.
Okay, we will
Right.
talk more, maybe, just back and forth, just us. Okay, but we're looking out for the great article. Thank you. Nicole.
Hi, first I wanted to thank you both so much for presenting your work. And I was curious, I mean, this is such a great opportunity. I teach at the school also, and to have the work in the gallery and then to have you come and talk to it. So it's putting you on the spot a little bit, but I was wondering how as you were talking, I was thinking about your work in the gallery and how it's physically in conversation with each other. And so I was wondering just how, again, putting you on the spot, but how your work in that space, I guess with all the other artists, but maybe if there's anything specifically that was kind of brought up with your proximity to each other.
Tirsa?
I'll take it.
It's a little rude. It is just making you putting you on the spot. But
no, I love being put on the spot, honestly, because then I can't overthink. So yeah, I think, well, it was cool to hear Beth talk about your work too, because I did notice, even though it's like very different from each other a little bit in terms of like process or materials, I also, it was hard not to think about parallels and similarities. And I think for me, the biggest or sort of foremost thing that comes to my mind is just bodies and sort of, how it occupies certain spaces. So I think that's kind of the first thing that jumps out at me. I would say in terms of like this idea of the figure and sort of like body parts, like I feel like you had all these details of these sort of body parts or like fragments in the collages. And that's, I don't know, for me, I guess maybe it's not as direct a connection, but I think there's an element of fragmentation or sort of like a jarringness in some of my work. Like I so a lot of my work in grad school in the first couple of years, I was using my body a lot and sort of just like doing all sorts of shit with it, and and like being naked and just all these things, and almost like getting it out of my system. So I feel like there's a parallel there a little bit. So I don't know, I'm ranting, but that's kind of what comes to mind for me.
No, I think I totally agree. I think also there's like a certain vulnerability that is a show like that, either on the face or underneath, showing parts of yourself or a side of yourself, or just trying to communicate in a different way than has been previously. Taking these things that maybe are I don't know, like I'm just thinking video is so like one of those things that actually flips women on themselves. It often takes advantage of women, I think, and a lot of times. I'm not talking about I'm just talking about like cinema and stuff like that, that it's so refreshing when it's used in opposition or to kind of show itself. It's kind of showing itself for what it is. Does that make sense? Maybe it's good that it's not scripted.
Ed, you have another question. Your hand's up. Ed, yeah. Ed, I think you're still muted. Do you want to ask another question?
No. My question is basically over. However, before the news report got published, since I sent you the first draft, you might want to, if you didn't, you might want to respond to me and give some of your comments or your statement that I can quote as a direct quote regarding the artworks. Because what I have in my news report are my interpretation.
Ed, maybe Ed, right?
Conversation, yeah.
Yeah. We'll take this offline on an email, just to make
when
sure
you get a chance.
Exactly. We have
something I can put the quotation marks and saying that such and such artist or the department or somebody said something, and it would be direct quotation.
Right. So Ed, we'll do this off here because remember we have just a few minutes. We're almost coming to the end, so this is better done in email. Thank you, though.
And one more request. If you can put this recording on the website, on the web page of the department, there would be good.
So let me just say this to everybody. We eventually publish, so we have a YouTube channel with all of our artists talks. It takes a little bit just because we need to be ADA compliant, so we work on the subtitles, but in a month or two you should be able to get it. Ed, you can have yours separately. I'll send it to you. So one more question if we have, and then I will say I'll let you go on with your dinner or anything you're planning for tonight. Any questions you still have to our wonderful artists?
No more question except my request for you to.
I know, Ed, we heard you. I would like to, yes, exactly. Yes.
Marks.
Ed, I'm talking
your works.
Okay, so I guess this will be the end of our night tonight. I wanted to just make maybe one comment or question, but what was really beautiful with both of your presentations and the work overall in the gallery is that yes, you're showing us first of all how you can use different materials. It was both of you have this there's a beauty to look at your process, and it's painful. I mean, you walking with that glass was just everybody cringe as you're watching it, Tirsa. And then Beth, is happy as your pieces seem, there is just also such a dark element to it, those gritting teeth and so I wanted to ask you, maybe this is more for Beth, but your response, your relationship to artifice, and so you said you love stuff and ornamentation, but there's also this, it seems to me, a love for artifice. And where do you find like the everyday quotidian, the things we do, the things we wear, and then where does it move over in the complete outrageousness of your work? And
Oh.
do you even think about that beforehand, or does it come as you're working? Things we do, the things we...
So yeah, I don't know. You know, it's one of those things where like the embellishment, it's just like kind of like moving beyond what, to me, the embellishment is kind of like painting, honestly. It's kind of like, what can I make this do and create that effect? But the idea of fashion, yeah, saying something other than what it really is and being a symbol for other things, I think a lot of times it is totally on purpose. And I think, actually, I think the artifice and all the other thing is kind of like pulling you away from that in a way. Like, so you are thinking, I'm not really, is that really what I see? No, it's just a sweater. You know what I mean? Oh, it's just a sleeve on a big green back room that could be, you know, a man's private parts. You know, it's kind of like just saying, hey, we see this every day. You know, it couldn't, you know, it's like, what are you really looking at? Maybe I think it's a question.
Thank you. A great answer. And Tirsa, last question to you. And sorry for taking over the floor here, but I'm curious with you, Tirsa, the difference. So a performance is something that ideally people are there to see it, right? Like they're sharing the pain or the exertion. How do you feel? So you have the act itself, and then you have the documentation. And do you see any, are you ever conflicted about it? Like, so is the performance happening for the documentation? Or can you just talk about that a little bit, how you stand between the two?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually something that I really was thinking about in grad school when I was doing a lot of these performances, because that was something that came up, was this idea, and I kind of talk more about it in depth in my MFA thesis, but this idea of private performance versus public performance. And sort of, yeah, like, does it, like for the Slow as Molasses, which was the broken glass piece, that I kind of intended, I usually do some sort of documentation unless I'm purposefully doing it in the style of like Fluxus or like a happening kind of thing, which is more just kind of how I, you know, that's like me dancing in public just off the whim. But anyway, so with that, I kind of had it in mind to also have it function as a video, or at least have that documentation. And then when I, you know, saw it, I was like, oh, this is great as a video piece too. And sort of same with the collectively dancing alone in the landscape. So for that, I knew I wanted to have it also function as sort of this big multi-channel video installation, and it hasn't really been shown in a way that I would love to have it ideally shown. Like, I don't know if anybody here saw the Pipilotti Reese show at MoCA, but that I was like, oh my God, this is my ideal space, just like videos of huge sizes covering every wall in multiple rooms. But there's something, you know, I think what I love about live performance, which is always kind of like foremost for me, I think what I'm most drawn to is that there's just this element of spontaneity and not knowing exactly what's going to happen or exactly what it's going to look like. You know, like I may have certain parameters or materials, but I don't really know what the end result is going to look like or feel like exactly. So yes, I think that's what I'm always kind of chasing. And I've just always been a very physical person, you know, like either athletic or dancing, or just, that obsessive part of me is always paying attention to people's movements and these little details that come out when I see people moving, and like kind of analyzing our bodily connections with each other. So
Beautiful.
Um,
All right, thank you so much. This was a great talk and very inspiring. Thank you. And thank you everybody for being here, for sticking around the extra 20 minutes. And hopefully we'll see you all next week for Jamie's talk. Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you, Alex. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you so much.
thanks, Alex.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Beth. Thank you. Goodbye.